This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Tax incentives, business recruitment, and the future of economic growth in the area. Tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. We're talking tonight about economic growth, tax incentives, business recruitment, and all that goes into that. And we're joined by a couple of guests. First is Joe Sano, who's president of Memphis Shelby Inform, a watchdog group that monitors taxes locally and local spending. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
We're also joined by Reed Dolberger, president of EDGE. It's the economic development growth engine for Memphis and Shelby County. And two reporters, Bill Dries from the Memphis Daily News, and Andy Meek, also from the Memphis Daily News. I'll start with you, Reed. There's a lot that goes into economic development, more than just tax incentives, more than tax pilots, which is a big thing that gets a lot of headlines. And we'll start with tax incentives, but we'll talk about other parts. One of the things about that is over the years, these tax incentives, people talk about them being unfair, that there's too much that's being given away, that's lost revenue for the city. People like you use them to recruit businesses, and it's a more complicated tale, you say. Tell us why tax incentives are such a big part of the economic development business recruitment plan.
Tax incentives are one of those necessary evils that go into a very competitive market. At its simplest form, I'm sure businesses around Shelby County don't like to give discounts in order to retain and attract customers. Well, economic development incentives, a pilot being one of them, is just another form of discount. It's a way of attracting and retaining clients, customers, companies that employ Shelby County residents in a very, very competitive market. Economic development incentives exist all across the country, in every state, in virtually every major city. And among the most prevalent are cash grants and property tax abatements. What we do here in Memphis and Shelby County isn't really cutting edge, but we do try to make aggressive use of the programs we have available in a market where we're competing not only with other parts of Tennessee, but we're competing with northern Mississippi, we're competing with eastern Arkansas, and we're competing from, in part, a position of strength, but in part, not so much. Memphis and Shelby County have some of the highest tax rates in Tennessee. As a matter of fact, when you look at combined city and county taxes, we have 6 of the top 10 communities in the state in terms of the tax rate. And so, in part, we start a little behind the ball when it comes to tax rates compared to our competition. They're certainly cheaper in Mississippi and much cheaper in Arkansas.
Let me interrupt you and say, just so everyone understands, when we talk about pilots, which again is the one that we won't fixate on that, but I do want to start there. That's one where, you know, a company that was maybe going to, if they get a $10 million pilot over 10 years, they were going to pay X amount in taxes, and your group, groups before yours would come in and say, well, you'll pay less than that, half of that, a quarter of that, very much less for that 10-year period. The theory being, well, they're going to invest money, they're going to hire a number of employees and so on. So it's a trade-off of these tax abatements for the growth they're supposed to bring?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
It's a percentage reduction in the taxes that would otherwise be paid in return for certain explicit benefits. And those benefits are measured, and we do a benefit cost analysis so that with the intent that every pilot is at least break even, and since EDGE has been in existence for approximately 13 months, the pilots have been substantially more than break even. So the company actually financially the community financially benefits from each pilot. We make money on those deals.
Okay. And it's important later in the show, we'll get to some of the organizations that you are succeeding, because there's a history of pilots and something that goes way back, and that your specific organization has only been around for about a year. Joe, I'll get you in here. You've been critical, and I'll let you speak for yourself, critical of some of these tax incentives, some of the spending generally of the city and county, but we're talking today about pilots and so on. What is your main criticism of the pilot programs in the past?
Well, Reed, I think the public needs to know, the taxpayers need to know, that these pilots, that when they end, that the tax abatement that was given, that company or what a piece of property will then pay the tax that has been abated. And that, I think, is what the public needs to know. There needs to be somebody, either the county trustee or your office, which I think would be better, to say, okay, here's the companies that are coming off tax abatement this year or last year or the last 5 years, and here's what they've been abated, and here's what they're now are paying. And I think the public feels that there's some kind of game going on here, and I've gone and tried to research this, and it's very difficult to find the numbers, but I find cases where, okay, it was $400,000 and now it's $200,000 after they come off, and the public needs an explanation of that.
And we talked earlier before the show, Reed, about, again, going forward, you're trying to put this stuff on your website. You're trying to be open and accountable. You're trying to recreate. Tell us a little bit about trying to recreate files from the past pilots that have been done that gets to some of what Joe's talking about.
And let me say it right up front, I agree with Joe. I agree that this is information that the public needs and would be very helpful, and it doesn't exist today. And I know that doing what he's trying to do is extremely difficult. To your point, Edge took over about 13 months ago, and what we find is that you've got all of these pilots from essentially a decade, and there's a lot of paperwork, and the paperwork's not always where you expect to find it, and it's difficult to recreate the files. And so we've engaged a company, Memphis Consulting, local group that does auditing and does business consulting and business turnarounds, and had them come in, and they are going through they've gone through all of the files, and they're calling and contacting all of the pilot companies, and they are constructing for us the first database that I think we'll all have a lot of confidence in terms of existing pilots. That's step one. Once that's done, to Joe's point, we then need to get with, in our case, the county and the city of Memphis and look at their records in terms of what was actually paid during the pilot and after the pilot, so that people have the information. When there have been sort of small studies done, the indication is that the pilot program in total has overperformed. In other words, the actual number of jobs created, capital investment made, payroll is in excess, is above what was pledged initially. But those were sort of small studies. We need to know on an ongoing basis. And to Joe's point, it would be good to know, as these companies roll off the pilots and pay taxes, what the net benefit is for the community. Because right now, for the 10 pilots that Edge has approved in its 13 months, we estimate that the benefit to the community is about $1.87, 1.87, for every dollar of tax abated.
So an 80-cent gain.
Right.
Put in $1, we get 80 cents back.
87
and we get
cents
that back in sales tax?
We get sales tax, local taxes. It's primarily from the spending of the new employees. But to Joe's point, if we tack onto that what these companies then pay in full, I think what we'll see as a community is that on the long term, this program really does pay off.
Okay. Andy, I'll bring you in.
What's fascinating covering all this is the way the playing field is level, in the sense that we're no longer competing with different states, but different countries, and it's a global playing field. You know, we've got to be on our game much more with employment the way it is, and you just got to be on your game. I want to go back to something you said earlier about competition. I know your organization was formed to help us compete better. I wonder, are we now as competitive as we need to be? And if not, how can we get there?
Well, I don't think we're as competitive as we need to be or competitive as we want to be. And I think the mayor spoke to that actually earlier this week when they announced that they wanted to put together a strategic economic development plan. The point is to identify those game-changing opportunities that we have and then work out a real plan on how we get from where we are to where we want to be. Attraction of companies to the communities, the retention and expansion of existing firms, the encouragement and support of entrepreneurs and small business people. These are all things that create jobs and wealth in the community. In order to get there, we have to have workforce that meets their needs, and workforce is a critical issue in this community. We have to have buildings and sites that meet their needs, and for the city of Memphis, that's becoming an increasing issue. We have to have the physical infrastructure, the transportation assets, the other means of support. So the economic development ecosystem really is the economy. It really is the community, and it is a complicated issue.
And Joe, you're critical often of spending, the level of spending, in lots of different areas, not just with business incentives and so on, but everything that Reed described, that ecosystem of economic development, a lot of that's public spending. And is your concern, you know, you raised your concerns about the record keeping and the accountability and, you know, analyzing performance. If that sort of analysis was done correctly. Are you good with the amount that's being spent, or would you still like them to see less government spending to fuel this sort of economic development pieces that Reed is describing?
I think we have a problem here. For instance, Shelby County as opposed to Davidson County. They have practically no pilots up there. Very few, $4 or $5 million, I think. And whereas we have 50 million, if you just the county, and we don't know what the city is. So, I think that we need to invest here. I have no problem of, investing in it if it can be proven to be a return. But I do have a problem if, if you give a loan or you give some investment and there's no provable return, and the taxpayers then end up paying for it.
Yeah.
And I point out that the tax rate in Davidson County is more than a third lower than it is in Memphis and Shelby County. They start with a tax abatement. We need to do, and so we need to give an abatement simply to level the playing field. And the tax rate in northern Mississippi, which is an industrial competitor of ours, or eastern Arkansas, which is an industrial competitor than ours, or Indianapolis or Birmingham or the other places that we compete for these industrial deals are lower than ours. And so all things being equal, we start in that sense, in that critical cost area, a little bit behind the 8 ball. The abatements are leveling the playing field.
When you talk about, and Joe brought up Davidson, so we compete with Nashville in a lot of ways, but one thing we compete with is our neighbor to the south, which is Mississippi, which is DeSoto County, and I think it was McKesson that recently was a Memphis-based industrial company that moved across the border a couple of years ago, before your group was in place and before some of the streamlining that you guys are trying to do was put in place. What is the attraction of North Mississippi to these companies that are maybe just moving across the border or moving to North Mississippi from other countries, other states?
Well, there's two issues. One is you can draw on the strength of Memphis without physically being in Memphis and Shelby County. So when you are in northern Mississippi, you are touting the benefits of the Memphis International Airport and particularly the FedEx Super Hub. The fact that we have 5 Class 1 freight railroads, 4 rail-to-truck intermodal facilities, the 4th largest inland port in the nation. You're drawing from the same labor force, and when it comes to quality of life, you're talking about Beale Street and the Brooks and everything else. We're competing against a mirror image of ourselves. So what does it come down to? Available buildings and sites and cost structure. And some of that cost structure gets to incentives. Mississippi has statutory tax abatement where we do not. Mississippi has a state income tax, a state wage tax. And I know it sounds strange to the ear, but from an economic development perspective, having a wage tax is actually an advantage for them.
Yeah, I don't get this. I never get this because I would think that the business would say, oh, that's a tax, so I don't want to go there. I'm the president of the company. I don't want to pay the taxes. I don't want my workers to have to pay the taxes. It's so counterintuitive to me that would be attractive to relocating companies.
It's not that.
To his point, there's one of the economic development groups in DeSoto that has a video touting the benefits of the area on their website, and literally the first frame, it's DeSoto, but he shots of the Memphis skyline, the Memphis Bridge, so literally the first frame.
That's right. It's not that having the wage tax is an advantage, it's what the tax allows you to do. Let's start from the other perspective though. Why isn't our situation the better one? Why is not having the tax preferable? Because in most cases, the president of the company is not moving here. We're not getting a headquarters, we're getting a branch plant. And this is not a business tax, it's a tax on individual wages. And companies aren't so concerned about what their employees are paying, but what having the wage tax does, whether you're Mississippi or Ohio or New York or a lot of other states, is it then gives you a pool of money that you can turn around and make into an incentive back to the company, which lowers the company's cost.
So you basically take that income tax of the employees that moved into Mississippi that were going to go into the Mississippi coffers, but somehow you funnel that back.
You rebate it. That's right. Matter of fact, I spent I think 5 or 6 years on the board of the Ohio Tax Credit Authority, which was a statewide entity appointed by the governor, and that's exactly what we did in Ohio. Mississippi does the same thing. Tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars are funneled back to reduce the company's cost of doing business. It doesn't really cost the state anything in terms of new revenue.
Right. And they argue, well, we're going to get all those people are going to buy homes and pay property taxes. They're going to sales tax and so on. Let's get Bill in here.
Joe, let me put the question to you. You're in charge of economic development. How do you think we should go after attracting these businesses, given the conditions that Reed cited that we have, some of the disadvantages, some of the advantages How would you go?
Well, I mean, you talked about, for instance, our transportation, our airport, our river is here, and I think about Mitsubishi and the plant that they're doing there. I would think that we could have sold them on Memphis because they need they need river traffic for these huge transformers that they're going to build there. It's a very high-skilled industry. We've got the land down there, and I think that, you know, we could have possibly sold them on moving here, but we went ahead and gave them a tax abatement anyway. Naturally, they're going to take that.
And Reed, that was done before you were at EDGE, or EDGE was
Right.
even formed, but I think you were somewhat involved through the Chamber, I assume, because you were at the Chamber of Commerce before that. Mitsubishi, a $200+ million project, and Electrolux got a lot of attention right when Mayor Wharton came in the office, and lots of big tax incentives. Why were the abatements? Why weren't the rail, all the things you said that are great about Memphis and the infrastructure and so on, why wasn't that enough? Again, as an observer of that project, not someone who was at the lead of it.
Because there's always alternatives. Because businesses go through a phased decision-making process when it comes to making a new investment. It's true whether we're talking about a company moving into the community or an existing company that's looking where to place an expansion. In the early phases, they're dealing with the big issues. Do they need to be close to suppliers or customers or raw materials, et cetera? As they go through these different phases, the geography narrows and the questions change. When they get down to the short list, there's 2 or 3 or 4 communities that are vying for this. All of those communities are decent choices for them, and probably no one is perfect. So it gets down to the balance between them, and incentives play a role in that. Area Development Magazine surveys corporate real estate executives and site selection consultants every year to see what are the factors that are most important to them in these decisions. And economic development incentives are always, well, they have 2 different categories, and they're always, both of them, in the top 10. Because when it gets down to the short list, between location here in Mississippi or here in Kansas City for that matter, the ultimate cost becomes a primary concern, as does local labor force. In the case of Mitsubishi Electric, it wasn't simply the pilot. We had to move a major trunk sewer line in order to make that site available to them. That was a $9 million cost. Without that, the project doesn't happen.
And isn't that all part of this sort of, it's like the arms race? I mean, that, you know, it's what Joe's saying, you know, can we just sell our benefits as a city, all these great strengths we have industrially and distribution-wise, and not put that money in the pot? But when you've got somebody down the street who has a pretty good infrastructure also.
And is willing to provide incentives.
Exactly. So if all the cities could get together and stop giving away this money, then we'd have
That ought to be a national law.
That should be it.
And there's been a lot of discussion about that. And a lot of us would say unilateral disarmament is not a good idea, but if we could come to a peace treaty that is national in scope, you know, that would be very good. I don't know any local officials who like these kind of incentives. They'd all like to have all of the revenue. Lord knows that here in Shelby County, in all of our municipalities, dollars are in short supply. And so if there were a way of doing with less or without.
Yeah, let's go. Andy.
I was at a presentation hosted by the site selection consultant for this Mitsubishi project, who said that it is a point I like he made, that all the incentives in the world can't make a bad project good. So that's one thing to consider. To this point about the arms race, we've spent a lot of time talking about pilots. You guys have other tools in the tool chest. What are some of those? I know you're adding to it. Maybe you're looking to add some more. I'd be curious to know how that's going and where that is.
Well, one of the criticisms of our community, and actually it predates EDGE, and was something we talked about when I came to Memphis to run the Memphis ED program, was the fact that our toolbox, if you will, is a little smaller than a lot of other communities. The state of Tennessee has certain programs, but compared to some of these states, as we talked about earlier, that have wage taxes, we have fewer statewide incentives. At the local level, we primarily have the pilot. We have cash grants for some of the larger projects like Mitsubishi Electric or Electrolux. And we have for a small number of loan programs for small and medium-sized firms. One of the things that EDGE was created to do was to help build this toolbox. Yes, we have the pilot program. The pilot program needs improvement, and none of the EDGE board members would argue with Joe on that point. But beyond that, We've already launched one new economic development financing program for small and medium-sized business. We call the Edge Impact Fund. We have 2 others that we're trying to bring online. So we and the other organizations that can provide these loans to small and medium-sized businesses have a more complete menu to help those firms grow.
And you talked, when we talked before the show, that some of this is federal money that really, that Memphis and Shelby County, for whatever reason, never took advantage of, that have been around for decades.
That's right. When I went to work in Syracuse, many years ago, 2 lifetimes ago, we were, in essence, a public sector loan shop. Now, we had tax abatement programs. We had 2 of them, as a matter of fact. But primarily what we did were loans to small and medium-sized businesses taking advantage of federal programs, state of New York programs, and our local programs. Well, Tennessee doesn't really have programs like that. They don't have the revenue source for it, but there are federal programs, particularly through the SBA, that have been around for 30 years. And then there are local programs. And so we are looking to put both in place. We're looking to add brownfield redevelopment, another major initiative that we don't do. We do some of, but we don't do maybe.
Brownfield is things like parts of the Defense Depot or maybe parts of North Memphis that have just been sort of abused and forgotten over time?
Brownfields are former industrial or commercial sites that sit vacant today because of the fear of environmental contamination. Whether or not they're contaminated or not, it's just the fear of the liability. Small business development programs, brownfield redevelopment programs, economic development financing programs. We're looking to begin to build the local toolbox so that we have other things to offer, not just a pilot.
Joe, before we were talking before the show, and before you were a watchdog for tax and so on, you ran your own company, Sano Manufacturing, here in Memphis for many years. When you hear about these incentives, I mean, do you wish you were back in manufacturing, able to take advantage of all this free money? I mean, what's your perspective as a former business owner here?
You know, no, I don't think. I think that I'm a purist, and as far as I think every business ought to stand on its own. But you know, you were talking about our lack of access to federal money, but it seems to me that Robert Lipscomb has a whole big file of tax incentives, and you know, talking about, for instance, tourist development zones. Or all of these kind of things. And he's talking about the redevelopment of everything that will spring from the Bass Pro project and such. I don't, you know, it seems like there's a lot of incentives out there. Now, the ones you're talking about, he's talking about the redevelopment of the North End and the Pinch District and all these businesses. I assume that it's going to get the kind of money you're talking about.
But you're not involved in that, not to put you on the spot, but you're, I mean, Robert Lipscomb with the city and in the heart of all these big kind of civic projects, from the fairgrounds to, you know, the housing authorities and so on, and a tremendous amount of public money is at stake. And you've written really eloquently and you know, cautiously about how much money is at stake, and that, you know, other cities, I think Stockton, California, you wrote about, where they got into a bad civic deal. And it wasn't the sole reason that Stockton is as a city is nearly bankrupt or went bankrupt, but it was a part of it, that they had backstopped a lot of public projects, right? I mean, that's part of your concern.
You know, I told you, we sold the business to a Cincinnati company. I guess they could have said they moved it to Cincinnati, but they weren't bright enough to think, okay.
Well, Reed wasn't in his job then.
That's right.
You know, so.
We're going to move this unless you give us X, Y, Z.
Right. Yeah. But go ahead, Bill.
Reed, do you think that Tennessee should have some kind of statutory standardization, if you will, of our economic incentives? Do we need what Mississippi and the other states have in that regard?
Well, having statutory tax abatement authority would allow us to do this program with a lot less complexity, a lot less cost to the company. Right now, we need to take physical title to property, both real property and tangible personal property, in order to grant a tax abatement. States that have statutory authority, like Mississippi, New York, Ohio, and many others, can simply do it. They have the authority to do it. Today, when you do a tax abatement, whether it's with us or any of the other entities within Shelby County that grant tax abatements, you're spending thousands and thousands of dollars on legal bills and other bills that really just come out of the company's pocket for no reason.
And as much as we, and I'll readily admit this, as much as we at the Daily News write about, we talk about these issues on the show, I didn't fully understand that until we talked earlier, that you're literally taking title to machinery, to buildings, to land, so that you as the tax-exempt nonprofit entity can get that tax abatement going. Again, I really kind of assumed that you guys could just say, all right, you'll get 50% off your taxes. There you go. Here's a little certificate that says so. I didn't realize it was that complicated.
It is complicated here. It's just the nature of the beast,
Right.
so that we have a substantial cost, the company has substantial cost, and at the end of the day, those costs are not productive. I mean, they're not adding jobs. They're not adding new investment. They're adding to the local economy. We're all paying attorneys. We're all paying accountants and others. But really, it may not be the most productive use of the money.
All right, last question from Andy here. We're down a minute left.
The people may think this. I wonder how often you guys find yourself telling people no. There may be a perception that you just have to ask and you'll get something.
The vast majority of companies we deal with do not get a pilot, do not go forward with us. We determine that they're going to go forward with a deal without us, and that's the way we want it to happen. Perhaps they don't meet the criteria. We try to vet that before embarrassing a company in public. That's not our intent. We want those companies here. We want them to grow. They don't necessarily need a pilot.
See the no's.
That's exactly right. We would prefer, quite frankly, that you don't see the no's, because again, we don't want to embarrass those companies, but we only want to bring deals to our board that we have confidence in, that we can recommend to them.
Okay. And again, you've gotten more, I think there's a bigger emphasis now, with just 30 seconds left, on retention incentives. There was some complaints that, yeah, it's all well and good to bring in these big companies, but when we're losing local companies, we're just trading water. Quickly on retention efforts.
We have a new retention pilot in place, and certainly the financing programs I talked about will help with that. Retention incentives are difficult everywhere.
And I'm going to cut you off there. I apologize. I didn't give you enough time to answer the question. Thank you for being here, Reed Dahlberger. Thank you, Joe, for being here, reporters. Thank you for joining us. Join us again next week. Good night.